Since the beginning of human curiosity, people have always wondered what lies beyond the horizon, what paths lead to new lands, and how to remember the way back home. Long before modern technology, before satellites and digital screens, human beings began to imagine the world around them and try to capture it in symbols and drawings. These early drawings slowly evolved into what we now call maps. But the journey of how maps were born and how they changed human history is one of the most fascinating stories of our civilization. Imagine a time when there were no compasses, no printed charts, and no GPS. The only guide was the sky, the rivers, the mountains, and the memory of people who dared to explore. That is where the story of the first maps begins. The earliest known maps were not drawn on paper. They were scratched onto stone, carved into clay tablets, or painted on the walls of caves. Some of the oldest examples discovered by archaeologists date back thousands of years. Around 25,000 years ago, ancient humans carved lines and shapes on mammoth tusks and stones that may have represented hunting routes or the layout of rivers and valleys. These were not maps as we know them today, but they were attempts to record landscapes, a way for communities to remember where food and water could be found. Imagine a hunter carrying such a piece of ivory marked with signs, guiding his tribe through forests and plains. To those people, these simple scratches were life-saving directions. As human societies developed, so did their need for better maps. Around 6,000 years ago, in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians created clay tablets with markings of fields, cities, and rivers. One of the most famous is the Babylonian world map, made around 600 BC. This clay tablet shows a circular world with Babylon at its center, surrounded by rivers and mountains, and even faraway lands called mysterious regions. For the Babylonians, maps were not just tools of navigation but also reflections of their worldview. They placed their city at the center of the universe, a sign of how people in the past understood the world through their own cultural lens. In ancient Egypt, maps were also crucial, but they were focused on land and resources. The Egyptians depended on the Nile River for life, so they drew maps showing the flow of the river, the locations of fertile lands, and the quarries from which they extracted stones for their temples and pyramids. One surviving Egyptian map, known as the Turin papyrus map, is considered the oldest surviving topographic map in history. Created around 1150 BC, it shows mountains, valleys, and gold mines. This was not a symbolic or religious drawing but a practical tool, used by workers to navigate the harsh desert landscape. It proves that maps were not only about imagination, but also about real-world survival and management. The Greeks took map-making to another level. They did not just draw land, they tried to measure and calculate it. Around the 6th century BC, the Greek philosopher Anaximander is credited with making one of the first attempts to draw the entire known world. Later, Hecataeus of Miletus improved on it, showing continents surrounded by oceans. But the greatest leap came with Eratosthenes, the librarian of Alexandria in the 3rd century BC. He not only made maps but also calculated the circumference of the Earth with surprising accuracy using shadows and mathematics. He realized that the Earth was round and tried to place lands and seas according to their relative positions. Then came Claudius Ptolemy in the 2nd century AD, whose book Geographia became the foundation of map-making for more than 1,000 years. Ptolemy described coordinates, latitude and longitude, and methods for projecting the curved Earth onto flat surfaces. His ideas shaped the way people imagined the world throughout the Middle Ages. While Europe was developing its own map traditions, other civilizations were also creating remarkable works. In ancient China, maps were considered essential for administration and defense. The earliest known Chinese maps date to the 4th century BC and were drawn on silk. By the Han Dynasty, Chinese cartographers were making detailed maps with grids, scales, and accurate depictions of rivers and mountains. They combined astronomy with geography, using the positions of stars to align their maps. The famous Pei Zhu, a statesman of the 3rd century AD, introduced 6 principles of map-making that emphasized accuracy and proportion, making him known as the father of Chinese cartography. In the Islamic Golden Age, map-making reached new heights. After the rise of Islam in the 7th century, Muslim scholars inherited knowledge from Greece, Persia, and India, and then expanded it with their own discoveries. Travelers, merchants, and sailors contributed information about distant lands, and geographers compiled it into maps. Al-Idrisi, a 12th century Muslim scholar, created one of the most detailed world maps of the medieval era. Commissioned by the King of Sicily, Roger II, Al-Idrisi's map showed Europe, Asia, and Africa with surprising accuracy. It was drawn on a massive silver disc and accompanied by a book describing over 70 different regions of the known world. His work became a masterpiece that influenced map-making in Europe for centuries. But long before maps became widespread, how did ordinary people find their way? Without printed maps, navigation depended on nature and memory. People studied the positions of the sun, moon, and stars. At night, sailors in the northern hemisphere used the North Star to guide their ships. On land, travelers memorized landmarks such as mountains, rivers, or even distinctive trees. They also used the direction of winds, the flow of water, and the behavior of animals as clues. Indigenous peoples across the world had their own systems. For example, Polynesian navigators in the Pacific Ocean used the stars, wave patterns, and bird movements to travel thousands of miles across open seas without a single map or compass. They even created stick charts made from coconut fronds and shells to represent ocean currents and islands, a unique form of mapping unlike anything else in the world. In Europe during the Middle Ages, maps often mixed reality with imagination. Known as Mappa Mundi, these medieval maps showed not just geography, but also religious beliefs. Jerusalem was often placed at the center, with biblical events illustrated alongside mountains and rivers. One famous example is the Hereford Mappa Mundi, created in the 13th century, which combines history, myth, and geography in a single grand design. For medieval people, maps were not purely scientific tools but also reflections of spiritual and cultural values. The age of exploration in the 15th and 16th centuries transformed maps forever. As explorers like Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, and Ferdinand Magellan sailed across oceans, they brought back new knowledge of distant lands. Cartographers began to redraw the world with greater accuracy. The invention of the printing press allowed maps to be copied and distributed widely, making them available not just to kings and scholars but also to merchants and travelers. The world was no longer a mystery, it was becoming measurable and knowable. Yet the excitement of discovery also meant maps often contained mistakes. Strange creatures, imaginary islands, and entire continents that did not exist were sometimes drawn on early maps, showing how much of the world was still unknown. The secrets behind the first maps reveal a story not only of exploration but also of imagination. Maps were never just scientific instruments, they were mirrors of how societies understood their place in the universe. For some, the world was flat, for others round. For some, their own city was the center of the cosmos. For others, the stars dictated the shape of the earth. Each map tells a story of the people who made it, their fears, their hopes, and their discoveries. Even today, as satellites orbit the earth and digital maps fit in our pockets, we continue the same tradition that began thousands of years ago with scratches on a stone. We still try to capture the world in symbols, still try to make sense of vast distances and unknown places. The difference is that now our maps are more precise, yet the mystery of what lies beyond remains. Just as ancient hunters wondered what was over the next hill, we wonder what lies on other planets, mapping Mars and the Moon with the same passion. The history of maps is a journey through human curiosity. From mammoth bones and clay tablets to silk scrolls and printed atlases, each stage marks a step in humanity's quest to know where we are and how to reach where we want to go. The first maps were not just about geography. They were about identity, survival, belief, and imagination. And that is why the secrets behind the first maps of the world are not just about drawings on stone or paper. They are about the story of us. The story of how humans learned to navigate not only the land and sea, but also the endless quest to understand the world itself.